Hello students, welcome to our afternoon read aloud. Today we are going to start learning about Martin Luther King. Martin Luther King Jr. was a famous and very important American, and his birthday is next Monday. So today we're going to start off with a book about the day that we'll be celebrating as a holiday, but also about his life. So let's see as we enjoy this book. I think it's mostly like a biography, but it has other information connected to Martin Luther King Jr. Here we go. I got a sneak peek the cover because remember, in an information book, when we're getting super smart about nonfiction topics, we start to learn just from looking at the cover. So I see, look, there's the Washington Monument. So this photograph must have been taken right here in Washington, D.C. And there's Martin Luther King Jr., and he's looking over a crowd of people and waving. I think they must be here to listen to him. Okay, Martin Luther King Jr. Day by Rebecca Rissman. Ooh, table of contents. Let's take a look. That way we know what we'll be learning. What is a holiday? Slavery and segregation. Who was Martin Luther King Jr.? Celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Martin Luther King Jr. Day. Symbols. Oh, symbols. Wow. Everything's always connected, isn't it? Calendar, picture glossary, and index. So remember, if I look at the heading, I know what's going to be on the page. This is, what is a holiday? A holiday is a special day. People celebrate holidays. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is a holiday. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is in January. Wow, so there's a family kind of celebrating a holiday together. And look, there's another picture taken at the Washington Monument. Slavery and segregation. Wow, so these look like pictures from quite a while ago. That looks like a really old picture. It says, long ago, most black Americans were slaves. They had no rights. A slave, or someone who's been enslaved, is someone who is owned by another person. It's their property. After slavery, black Americans were segregated. They were kept separate from other Americans. So here you see separate water fountains for African Americans. Who was Martin Luther King Jr.? Martin Luther King Jr. lived in Atlanta, Georgia. Atlanta was segregated. So there he is, and I see a sign, we want to sit down like anyone else. So that's talking about how blacks couldn't go in restaurants and sit down at the same place where whites were enjoying a meal. And lots of other places they couldn't go in either. Black people in Atlanta could not go to the same places as white people. So this is in maybe a bus station or a train station, and it's saying that there's separate colored waiting room. There's a separate place for whites and a separate place for blacks to sit and wait. Martin Luther King Jr. did not think segregation was right. He studied religion. He became a minister. So a minister is a leader of a church, right? He spoke out against segregation. He became a leader. Remember, segregation is separation of people based on race, and we'll be learning more about that. He told black Americans to stand up for their rights. He gave a speech about freedom for black people. He said he dreamed that all people could live together in peace. In 1968, a man killed Martin Luther King Jr. People all over America were sad. Martin Luther King Jr. had helped end segregation. Black Americans were able to vote for the first time. Martin Luther King Jr.'s dream was beginning to come true. Celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. Day. On Martin Luther King Jr. Day, people do service for each other. People help their communities. People help their neighbors. Martin Luther King Jr. Day symbols. Martin Luther King Jr. said, "I have a dream." He said he dreamed that all people had the same rights. This speech is a symbol of Martin Luther King Jr. Day. It reminds people of freedom for all Americans. Now, isn't that interesting to think? We've been learning about symbols as like a picture, right? Or an object, something that stands for something else, like a flag. But in this case, we're really stretching our thinking to understand that a speech, a famous speech that Martin Luther King Jr. gave, is a symbol that stands for him and stands for rights for everybody, stands for equal rights for everybody. Oh, calendar, here's the last little thing. Martin Luther King Jr. Day is the third Monday of January. And here's a picture glossary. Segregation, when people are kept separate from others. Slaves, people who have no rights and work hard for others. Well, they don't just work hard for others, they are owned by other people. And it's a very sad and terrible thing that we used to have in our country, where people could own other people and they could do anything they wanted with them, and they had to work very hard for the people who owned them, and they didn't have rights. We're going to learn more about Martin Luther King Jr. over the next couple of weeks, along with other famous Americans who fought with Martin Luther King Jr. for equal rights for everyone. People like, you may have heard of this person, Rosa Parks, and also there are other special people like Ruby Bridges, this little girl. This is an amazing story we'll also enjoy learning about in the next couple of weeks. I hope you enjoyed our afternoon read aloud. Don't forget to keep washing your hands, cover your coughs and sneezes, do some reading, do some writing, help your family around the house, and I'll see you tomorrow. Bye.